Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate the witnesses being here. Mr. Katz, I was pleased to read in your testimony and then to hear in one of the earlier questions that you all are fine with H.R. 446 related to Gathright Dam and H.R. 447 related to the Flanagan Dam, and I appreciate that very much. Thank you. I am also interested in, not only electric generation, but making sure that we have jobs in my district. One of the great concerns in the coal fields is that production has been down, and folks have said you all need to reinvent yourselves. We think coal has a long future, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we're looking for new ways. A couple of my friends in the Virginia General Assembly got a bill passed this last year. I had mentioned it in a previous hearing that there were some folks interested in doing some things related to pump storage projects. And what they're trying to encourage with the Virginia language is to see if they can entice somebody into putting a pump storage facility inside an exhausted or abandoned coal mine, making it a closed loop system. I appreciate your written testimony on those issues as well. One of the questions that you raised, and I'd like for you just to do some explaining for me, is you felt like there was, because of the add-ons, and I'm probably using the wrong language, but the additional energy items that, like solar or wind, to help pump the water up, that there was a problem in the draft language that we have floating around, at least that's the way I interpreted it, with municipals, maybe adding on non-municipals. Could you explain that to me?
Sure, it's kind of a historical artifact, but years ago, back in the 80s, there were instances before the commission. Well, I should draw back.
Way back in the 80s.
Yeah, when I was a youngster. I guess I should drop back 5 yards. I mean, the Federal Power Act, in the Federal Power Act, Congress provided that a municipality would get a preference over a private entity in obtaining a preliminary permit or a license. So if all things being equal, if a city applies and a private company applies, the city wins. And at some point in the 80s, the commission discovered that municipalities were applying and saying, I'm a muni, give me preference, but then as soon as they got the license or permit, or even during the process, they would turn around and sell it to another private entity, not the one that was trying to compete with them, but somebody else. And so the commission decided that was not fair competition, and it was not appropriate to put private entities at a disadvantage. So the concern that I expressed with regard to that portion of the bill was it would appear to allow a municipality to outcompete a private entity in the first instance, and then do what the commission has hitherto precluded agencies from doing, turn around and sell it to a different private entity, so that the private entity that was trying to develop the project, and indeed it might have been the entity that was out there in the field first, would be placed at a disadvantage. That's something for Congress to consider.
Okay, and I appreciate that. And so it's not really a concern over just closed loop pump storage, but a concern that and then perhaps the solar or the wind might be transferred as you just described. Is that correct?
Yes, it's not specific to closed loop. It's just that's, I believe, the only one of the bills in which that language appears. So that's why I raised it in that context. But no, it is not something that is in the nature of closed loop pump storage.
And otherwise, in regard to the draft language on closed loop hydro pump storage, you all feel fairly comfortable that we're headed in the right direction on that?
I think it has a lot to commend it. Again, we'd be happy to work with committee staff just to make sure that there are no duplicative areas or things put into the statute that make things take longer or are repetitive of other agency actions.
Because as some of the other witnesses on both sides of the aisle have pointed out, that when you're using hydro, that's a very clean source of energy. In the case of using a captive water source inside of an abandoned mine, you really don't have a whole lot of problems as long as initially it's structurally sound, of course. But we believe that we have a number of those sites in Southwest Virginia, maybe some in my friend Mr. McKinley's district over in West Virginia as well. But we believe that this is one way that we can continue our region's long-standing history working in energy, and at the same time create jobs in a field in an area where jobs have disappeared as a result of some downturns in the economy and some regulations that we're going to try to work on.
Yes, if I may, I'll say.
Yes, please.
The commission approved a project of that type in California, the Eagle Crest Pump Storage Project, which is using an abandoned mine and is currently under development. So those kinds of things can indeed make sense.
All right, I appreciate it very much, and I see my time is gone. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair